Welcome to another video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to create a game clock. This is going to be an in-game clock that keeps track of a fictional time. So this doesn't necessarily have to be tied to your computer's time. This is going to be a game clock that actually, keeps track of its own time, basically. And you can tie the day-night cycle to that time. So if you've got night lighting and day lighting, then at certain times of the day you can have those change. So and you can also have other events happen, like lights come on and things like that. So this is going to be a continuation to my previous day-night cycle video. Now in the previous video I talked about how you would go into game configuration, you would turn day-night cycle on in the gameplay settings, and you would use the cycle duration of the global.time setting to dictate when day and night happens. So if you refer to the previous video that I did on day-night cycle, if you want to know a bit more about that, then feel free to check that out. But this is going to be a very different approach where we don't even need to use the day-night cycle option. We're going to do this a completely different way, and we're actually going to create a working in-game clock that you can have on widgets, for example, that displays the time, and it will keep track of the time. You'll be able to adjust the time. We're going to talk about how to make it a function, so that way you can easily adjust it without having to change lots and lots of the code. What I will say is that this process that we're going to set up today, it is a bit of scripting. So if you're still getting your feet wet with scripting and you don't want to sort of dive headfirst into, a bit of scripting, then, maybe hold off on this video for just a while. But that being said, I am going to walk you through all of the code, explain what it's doing and why it's doing it. So you should learn it as well as setting it up. But the benefit to this is you'll be able to adjust the time very easily. So you can make the clock go faster. You can make a real-time clock so that an hour in game is actually an hour in real time. So you can fully adjust the day-night cycle, and we'll talk about how that works. So there's quite a bit of flexibility that comes with this particular approach to doing a day-night cycle, okay? But it all starts with, first of all, making a clock. So what I've done ahead of time is I've set up a map, very simple map. It's got four torch models placed down. They have two animations if we go into the box editor. So it's got a default, which is just off, which is by default. And then we've got a default on, which is the light on, but also the flame animating as well. So when it turns to night, we will switch over from one animation to the other using the script. I've also set up 3 lighting presets. This is the daytime one we're currently on at the moment, but we've also got a dusk dawn. This is going to be used for both dusk and dawn. So if we preview that, it's like a sort of slightly darker, more orangey hue. And then we've got a nighttime, which is a much darker, bluer tint. Okay, so we're going to sort of transition between the three, as the clock cycles through the time. Okay, for now we'll go back to daytime so we can see the map properly. So the first thing I want to do is set up the widget for my clock that I'm going to display the information in. So to do that, I'm going to create a new widget, which I'll just call clock. And obviously you could put this, in the top corner of an existing widget. So it doesn't have to be its own widget. It could be, in your journal, for example, or in your inventory, or wherever you want to put this display that shows you the current time in the game. But for now, we're just going to keep it as a separate widget, just because that's all that we're doing in this video. So I'm not going to show the title bar. I'm going to set the height to 1. So it's just one display unit high. Might tweak the width depending on how it ends up looking, but what we're going to do is we're going to drag a text label into the widget. And we're going to have another one as well on the far right. So 2 text labels, one on the far left, one on the far right. The one in the far left, we're going to expand it just a little to about there. And we're going to write into here something very specific. We're going to write $, open and close squiggly curly brackets. And inside the curly brackets, we're going to type global.property, open and close square brackets, and in speech marks inside the square brackets, hour. And then after the curly brackets, so at the very end of everything, you're going to put a semicolon, and then you're going to put $, open and close another set of curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, you're going to type global.property, open and close square brackets, and inside the square brackets, speech marks, and inside the speech marks, write min_display. Obviously, you can call these global properties anything you want when you do your own version of this, but if you want to follow along, these are the names that I'm using. So just to go over that one more time before we move on, so it's clear, $, open and close curly brackets, global.property within the curly brackets, and then open and close square brackets, and then quotes hour, so global property hour within the $ curly brackets. Then a colon, and then open and close $ curly brackets again with global.property min_display inside there. Okay, what we're going to write in this, the right hand one is $, open and close curly brackets, global.property, open and close square brackets, and within the speech marks, 12 hour. So global.property 12 hour. Okay, these are the names of 3 global properties we're about to set up. Okay, but they need to be put into these text labels so that in game, this text will get replaced with the actual time. Okay, that's what we're setting up. So what's going to be inside these global properties are the numbers for our clock. So we're going to have it show in these text boxes. Okay. Now we need to set up those global properties. So I'm going to save this. We'll set this to appear top left when it's shown. Okay. And we'll save the widget. So now we need to go to game configuration and we need to set up a few global properties. Okay. So first of all, we need 3 number global properties. So 1, 2, 3. This one is going to be called hour and it's going to start at 0. This is going to be minutes. That's going to be 0. And this is going to be seconds. And that's also going to be 0. We then need 2 string properties. So change this to string and do add twice. This is going to be min_display. And although we're actually not going to use it in this particular video, we'll set it up anyway. We're going to type sec_display. So if you wanted to do the seconds, we're not going to, but if you wanted to, then you've already got this set up. And I'll quickly show you how you would add seconds in if you really wanted to show those. Typically, clocks don't really show the seconds, so following that, we're not going to do that either, but I will show you how to use it if you do want to. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change the value inside the min display and second display to 00 as the default text. Okay. Now, bear in mind, although it looks like these are numbers, in game they will have quotations around them. So these are actually a string of numbers, whereas this is actually the number 0. Okay, because the data type dictates, what's inside rather than the actual value, if that makes sense. So, or at least in the case when you're setting up with the user interface. So, anything else we need? Yes, we need a text. We need another string. So add one more string. This is 12 hour. And this is going to default to AM, like that. Okay. So click OK, and that is our global properties setup. Okay, so the rest of this now is code, because or nearly all of this now is just using those global properties and calculating the time and putting it onto our clock. And then once we've got the clock displaying, we can then start tying all the actions to the different times. So let's start with our global function. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to game configuration, going to go to global functions, and we're going to create a new function. So type function, because that's how you create a function, is you start with the word function. Then you give your function a name. So I'm going to call this start_clock, open and close square curly parentheses, round brackets, and then type begin, and then press enter twice and type end semicolon. So there's just the sort of the beginning and the end of our function. We're going to have two parameters in our function. So click in between the parentheses and type $length, pound length, $length, and $seconds. Okay, so there's our function name and the parameters that it's going to take. Press tab to indent, and we're going to create a while loop. While true, do, and then enter twice and end the while loop. It's always a good idea to do your ends the same time as you do your openings. Then you don't have to worry about have you closed the right amount, have you put the right amount of ends at the end. It's a good habit to just end them at the same time as you open them, and then go back in and press tab, and then you only have to worry about the code that goes inside. So what this while loop is just going to do is it's going to constantly tick. So this is going to tick all the time. The moment we call this function, this is going to be an eternal while loop. So it's just going to always tick. So the first thing we want to do is we want to wait $length. Okay. So first thing is going to wait an amount of seconds, which you specify when you call this function. Okay. Then we want global.property seconds. This is the number one that we set up in the game configuration. Global property seconds should add 1, so it should go up a second. And then we want to check if global.property seconds is less than 10, then end. If it's less than 10, we want global property set display. And again, we're not really going to use this, but it's good to put it in anyway, because then if you want to display it, you only have to add it to the widget. You don't have to then add it in code. So we may as well put it in even if we don't end up displaying it. So we want this to equal open and close speech marks, 0, and then $ curly brackets, global dot property seconds. Now, because you'll notice that seconds has gone white, we need to add slashes to the quotation marks so that it doesn't error out like that. And then semicolon, so that's the end of that. Else global.property sec display equals string. So we're going to convert this to a string, global.property seconds, and then end. So what this is basically saying is every however long, increment the seconds property by 1. if the seconds property is less than 10, so if it's a number like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, then we want the second display to include a 0. So it should show as 0, 1 rather than just 1, okay? And if it's 2, it should be 0, 2 instead of just 2, okay? That's what this bit's doing. Is it's saying if it's a number less than 10, then show the 0 before you show what's in the seconds. Otherwise, if it is a number that's 10 or more, you can just show the seconds. So 10 can just be like that rather than, having a 0 at the beginning, which wouldn't make any sense. Okay, so that's just a formatting. This is just a formatting display bit of code. Next, we then want to check our seconds parameter. So if global.property seconds is equal to $seconds, so if they're the same, then end. First thing we want to do is execute script. Now, we will set this script up in a second. It doesn't exist at the moment, but we're going to call this script minutes. We then want to set the seconds to 0 and set the display back to 0, 0. And that is our function. So click validate, and if you've been following along, that should be validated and fine. So what this code is going to do is it's going to check if the amount of seconds each time we add reaches this amount, then consider that essentially a minute. So you're then going to execute the script minutes, and that we'll deal with in a second. But because we've now reached a minute, we want to reset the seconds. First of all, the counter should go back to 0, but also the display should now show 0, 0 because it's now a complete minute. And then this whole thing will loop round again. It's going to always be the seconds is always going to be ticking, okay? But the minutes is only going to be executed when it reaches this threshold, okay? And this will all this will make more sense when we actually, put it into effect and see it working. But for now, this is the code for the function. So if you've got that entered correctly and it's validated, we can click OK. So now we need to go to the script editor and we need to make a new script called minutes. And we're going to click edit. I'm going to do this in the text editor. So I suggest you do the same, even if you're, familiar more with the visuals, just so that then you can follow along. Just remember that the text part of things is down at the bottom of the Visual Script Editor. So just click this button here to expand it and then click edit. And then you can write the text. So for minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to type global.property minutes add 1. So we're going to increment the minutes by 1. And we're basically going to do roughly the same code. So I actually may as well go back to my function and copy both of these, because essentially it's the same thing but just with minutes. So we'll paste, and we need to fix the indentation. So if global property minutes less than 10, then global property min display equals 0, and then show the minutes. Otherwise, min display equals convert to string minutes. And then this is going to be different, however. If global property minutes is equal to 60, then execute script hour, minutes, then goes back to 0, and min display goes to 0, 0. Apply and save. And there's our minutes script. Very simple. Okay. And then one more. Hour. Again, click edit in the text editor. So, same thing again. In fact, let's may as well go and copy our minutes just so that we've got something to work with. Because again, a lot of this is going to be somewhat the same, but not entirely. So we'll start with minutes as our base, copy paste, but then we'll make some changes. So the first thing is hours needs to be incremented by 1. Now, I'm actually going to delete these because this is actually more different than I thought. So to start with global property hours plus equals 1, that's definitely the first thing we need to do. But then what we need to do is we need to check if global.property hours. Now, this will depend on what type of clock you want to set up, because you could have a 24-hour clock or you could have a 12-hour clock. Now, for the purposes of this demo, tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do a 12-hour clock, but I'll also talk you through how you would make changes to this if you wanted a 24-hour clock. But in this case, because I'm doing a 12-hour clock, I want to check if the hours is equal to 13. In other words, have you gone beyond, has the number of hours now reached beyond the 12-hour clock? And we'll put an end in. If it has, then global.property hours, or is that hour? I should check actually, because don't want to get the global property name wrong. It's hour. Okay. So hour, hour, and hour. So if the global property hour is equal to 13, then global property hour should equal 1. So in other words, we're converting 13 to 1 o'clock, and we're saying start the cycle again, but now from 1. Okay. And then end. So that's the first if. Then we need another one. If global.property hour is equal to 12, which is the end of the clock. Again, we'll put an end in. Then we also then need to check if global.property 12-hour is equal to AM, then global.property 12-hour now equals PM, else global.property 12-hour now equals AM. End. And I think that's the end of that. So what this one's basically doing is it's saying if the hour is 12, then check what's the current AM or PM. And if it's AM, set it to PM. Otherwise, if it's PM, set it to AM. So at 12, it's always going to change from what it was to the next thing. So that's going to be your AM, PM flip. Okay. And again, if you're doing a 24-hour clock, you don't need to worry about this bit of code. Instead, what you would do is you would say if global property hour is equal to 25, or is that right? There isn't 24 on a clock, is there? There's 23 and then 00. So if it's equal to 24, then you would set that to 00. And you would have to have a, if you're doing a 24-hour clock, you would have to have a hour display as well to do the text because obviously numbers can't have 0, 0. So it would be 0, but then you'd have to have a, I'll just do it quickly, global property hour display. If you set one up that was a string, that would have to equal 0, 0. And then in your hour code, when you're adding it, you would need to do the same thing that we did with minutes, which is check if global property hour less than 10, then global property hour display equals string 0 plus the global property hour, else hour display equals string the hour. In other words, it's the exact same code as, for example, our where is it? It would be the exact same code as this, just hours and hour display would be in these things, okay? If you were doing a 24-hour clock. But because we're doing a 12 one, we're only worried about when it equals 13. That should then be 1 instead. We don't need to worry about the hour display. We don't even have one. And then if it's 12, we want to flip it between AM and PM, depending on which one it's currently on, okay? And that is basically it in regards to the clock. The next bit I've got in my notes is then to make it do something, which we'll get to afterwards. But let's just apply and save that. Now, we've set all of that up, but currently, just realize there's a gap there, but currently there's no way to start it, okay? So we've created all these scripts. We've got an hour script, which is increasing our hours and showing a 12-hour clock. We've got our minute script, which is incrementing our minutes. And we've got our function in global functions, which is handling our seconds and basically the whole function of the clock. Basically, the whole clock is governed by the seconds, okay? So the seconds govern everything. So as soon as the seconds reach a certain amount, it executes the script minutes. And as soon as the minutes equals 60, that executes the script hours. So it all starts from this function, okay? This function governs everything. That's why we've created it as a function, because then we can control everything with just this line here, okay? So what we need to do is now go into our startup script. And what we'll do is we will show widget, because obviously we've got our widget to show as well, clock. And then we will start clock, open and close parentheses. And then the first parameter is how long does each second take? Is it literally a second or is it half a second? You know, so just for the purposes of showing the clock working really fast, let's set it to 0.01. So that's basically a hundredth of a second. And then the second parameter is how many seconds before a minute gets executed. So we could set this to 60, and that would be the accurate amount of seconds in a minute. But that will obviously impact how slow your game day-night cycle is. So if you wanted it to be half that, for example, then you could set it to 30. Just to be clear, if you wanted a realistic clock, you would set this to 1 second and 60 of them. Yeah, so that's 1 second and 60 of them until a minute gets triggered. Okay, so that means your clock will now be real time. Yeah, so it will literally take an hour for it to go from 12 to 1. Okay, but in this case, let's just make it really fast by making it so that 100th of a second, and then immediately after 1 second, go to the next minute, and then keep going until you've got an hour. Okay, so let's apply and save, and let's run our game and see how this looks. There we are. So it's currently AM, 1 o'clock, flying through, 2 o'clock, 3, and 4, and then when it reaches 12, it should jump to PM, and then it should also, when it reaches 13, cycle back round to 1 and be 1 PM. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12 should jump to PM. There we go. And then it should go back round to 1. and now it's 1 p.m. And then when it reaches 12, it'll go back to a.m. and it'll be 1 a.m., etc., etc., etc. Okay, so there's our working clock. In terms of the display, the clock is now working as a display. Okay, so yeah, as I say, you could put this in a journal or in your inventory if you didn't want it in its own standalone widget in the top corner. You could put this wherever you want to be able to see what's the time in the game right now. Okay, now obviously this is whizzing through just to show that PM and the display changes and everything. See, it's now 12 a.m. again. You've done a complete 24-hour. So if we wanted to make this more, more like perhaps a more realistic game time, you might have it take a second, but it only has to do, let's say, 15 seconds before it does a minute. So let's see what effect that has on the clock. So you can see by just changing these two numbers, we can affect how fast or slow our clock goes, which is why we put it in a function, because it means we don't have to go into the actual seconds script if we had one, having to change all the numbers. We can now just change it on this single line here in our function. So let's see how long it takes for that to go to 1. It's going to take about 15 seconds. There you go. So as you can see, that's taking 15 seconds to go to every minute. Okay, so it's not going to be an hour to get to 1 o'clock, but it's, much longer to get to 1 o'clock than it was a second ago when we had it whizzing through. So again, you can tweak those numbers, and that's why I put 2 numbers in the function, both the amount of time between each second, but also the amount of seconds. That just gives you so much more control over how fast or slow you want your clock to go, because you've now got complete control. You could even make it longer than real time. You could say, I want 60 seconds and I want 100 seconds. That would just, take forever to get to 1 minute, let alone, an hour. But, just gives you that level of control. I might just make this, I might keep that at 0.05 and then 15. And we'll just see how fast that is. It's not flying through, right? So it will take a little while to get to 1 o'clock. So at least it's got some time. Bearing in mind, at the speed at which this is reaching 1 o'clock and then 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock, etc., if you tie your day-night cycle to that, it will be, it will feel like, enough time is passing. But again, you'll be able to adjust that by changing the clock. So now let's get to how do we tie the events to the clock. So for that, you need to go back into the hours or the hour script, and we need to add some code at the bottom here. So you need to decide what hours you want things to happen. Now I'm following, what would typically be, a usual 24-hour cycle. So I'm going to start with if global.property hour is equal to 5, then I'm going to grab it from here, apply lighting preset. And I called it dusk dawn. And let's have it take 10 seconds. Else if global.property hour is equal to, let's say 8, then what we're then going to do is check whether that's 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. So 12 hour, if it equals p.m., then that should be considered night. So we'll apply the lighting preset nighttime. And that can take 5 seconds, let's say. Quicker transition. Otherwise, if it's 8 a.m., then apply lighting preset daytime for 5 seconds. End. And there we go. Apply and save. So, oh, I missed something. If global property was the R. So, what this is basically saying is if global property hour, if the hour is 5, now because I'm doing both dusk and dawn in the same preset, I don't need to worry about whether it's 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. It's just if it's 5 in the morning, then it will be dusk. If it's dawn. And if it's 5 in the evening, then it'll be becoming dusk. So I don't need to worry about whether it's PM or AM because I'm using the same lighting preset for both dusk and dawn. If I'd split them, then I would then check if it's 5 p.m. or 5 a.m. like I am doing with 8. And then I'm saying if it's not 5, then if it's 8, then check if it's 8 p.m. If it is, then set it to night. Otherwise, if it's 8 a.m., set it to day. Okay? So if we save that, which I think we have, let's test this out. Just so we can test it, let's speed up the time. Let's go back to our startup and put this back to 1 so we can see it fly through. Now, at the moment, this is inaccurate because it should be night. So there is one thing we forgot to do, but we'll fix that in a minute. But when it reaches 5, it should transition to dawn. And then it will transition to day again. So we'll actually see it. We'll see day twice. It should have been night. But you can see it's transitioning now to the sort of yellow dusk. And then when this reaches 8 a.m., it should become day again. So it's going to start brightening up. And there we go. So it's now day. As soon as this ticks around to 5 p.m., so it's currently still 10 a.m., and then 11 a.m., and then it will be 12 p.m., and then it will be 1 p.m., etc. Once this reaches 5 p.m., it should then go back to the dawn dusk preset. There we go. So it should start to change now. It's time to go more yellow. And then when it reaches 8, it should then start transitioning to night. And there we go. It's now 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, etc., etc. We also need to light up the torches, which we'll do that in a second as well, just to finish things off. But let's just make sure it does a complete loop, at least till dawn again, just to make sure it's fully working. So it's now 1 a.m. So you can see it's working sort of accurately as it should. Just a couple of things we need to clean up. But then in terms of a day-night cycle tied to a clock, this is fully working. So now it's 5 a.m., so it should start to brighten up. Dawn should start rising. And then at 8, it should go back to full day again. And there we go, we've got a full day cycle. Okay, so let's close the game for a sec. So a couple of things. Because the clock starts at midnight, because it starts, because if you think about it, we're setting everything to start, the hour starts at 0, the minutes start at 0, the seconds start at 0. So everything basically starts at 0 o'clock, which is basically midnight, if you think about it. So what you can do is go to your overworld map or all the maps that have your day-night cycle in and just set them to start, not on this lighting preset, but the one that's accurate for the clock. So just make sure you click that button, set this to the lighting preset it should start on, and then tick apply preset. So as long as your map looks nighttime in the map editor, then when you play the game, it will be in sync with your initial clock settings. Alternatively, you could just change the values. If you wanted it to start daytime, then you would just make sure that the clock doesn't start at 12 midnight. It starts, 12 a.m. or 9 a.m. or whatever. You can basically adjust the starting values, because bear in mind it should still work, because you're still checking, for example, in our function for seconds. We wouldn't necessarily need to worry about the minutes or the seconds. We would just change the hour. So we could basically say, for example, let's see if this works. It should just be as simple as going to our global property and setting this to, let's say we want it to start at 9 and 9 a.m. Let's see how that works. We would put this to daytime, because by 9 a.m. it would be daytime, because 8 a.m. is the switchover period. So let's just test that the clock shows 9 a.m., which it does. So it starts ticking from 9 a.m. Let's just check, because I'm just curious. I want to make sure it does do a proper day-night sweep with these values. It should do, but it's just good to check. So you can see how sort of easy to adjust things are just by changing the values of the clock and the values of the properties, how they start and etc. So let's just wait for this to tick over to 5, just so I can check it does transition to dusk, which it looks like it's doing, which is great. And then at 8, it should then go to night. Which it's doing. So we'll assume that that was also going to turn back to day. You can check that in your own time. So the last thing to do is just quickly sort out these 4 torches. I'm actually going to put them in a group. So I'm going to shift select, hit G, call them torches. And I was going to do play group animation, but that's not going to work for what I want. So rather than do that, I will, let's put it in the nighttime one. So for $X in group torches do end override animation $X default on and then if it's daytime, for X in group torches override animation default back to default. Okay, so that should turn the torches on when it reaches nighttime, and then turn them off when it reaches daytime. And as it's going through its cycle, we'll just wrap the video up. So that's pretty much going to cover the concept that I wanted to cover in this video. So we've scripted a clock that we can adjust, and we've tied the lighting of the day and night and the evening, etc., to the clock. You can obviously, there is a couple of things I wanted to quickly talk about in regards to that before we end, but let's just quickly wrap up the rest. And we're just testing events being tied to that as well, such as animations being played, which should work. I don't see why they wouldn't. So at 8 o'clock, they should come on. There we go. So they've all come on just as it transitions to night. You could obviously put a bit of a delay, or you could animate the lights coming on, etc. Or just make sure they turn off again when it gets to 8 a.m. And then we'll just go over the last few things. But in essence, that is the clock video. So I hope it's been interesting, and I hope that you've been able to follow it and it's made sense. If you have any questions, obviously, feel free to ask on the Discord. So we'll just let this finish off, and then I'm going to quickly go over one last few things to mention. So it's now transitioning back to dawn, and then at 8 a.m. they should turn off. Oh, that's interesting. One of them turned off, so that would need looking into. I wonder why. Yeah, I need to look into that. Don't know why only one of them turned off, but there you go. But you get the idea. Concept is it works. Yeah, I'd have to look into that a bit more. But you get the idea. But the last thing I wanted to talk about was and I should also mention that obviously anything you want to have happen at night, for example, you would just put after the apply lighting preset. So if you wanted to move characters, move character into their house, for example, or move them somewhere, then you could use move character or put character or whatever to put entity, to put them into a building or something at a particular, at that time of day. And then obviously when it's daytime, you would move them back out. But the last thing I wanted to mention is that the lighting presets, these timings here, so 10 seconds for dusk to dawn and 5 seconds for nighttime and 5 seconds for daytime, you will need to tweak those if you change the time of the clock. So at the moment, start clock 0.05, 1, that's why I'm using the values 10 and 5 and 5 for my night, dawn and day times, because they are timed to this speed. Okay, and that might be, for example, if you were doing a real time clock where it's literally an actual hour for every hour in game, then 10 seconds transitioning to dawn might be too quick, right? So you might have that transition over 60 seconds or maybe even 120 seconds or something. You might make it just transition just that little bit longer. So bearing in mind that this function doesn't automatically adjust the lighting presets, those will have to be timed differently yourself based on the times that you give the clock. So get the clock working at the speed that you want, and then once you know what the times are, it's important to mention that the lighting presets will still trigger at the same time. So in other words, if you make this clock faster or slower, the dusk dawn lighting preset will still trigger at 5, no matter how fast it takes to get to 5, that will still trigger. It's just how quick it goes to full dusk or full night or full day. You might need to adjust that if you're doing a slower clock, because obviously, if it's an hour in game time to real time, then 5 seconds is going to be a very quick jarring transition for something that's supposed to be much more realistic. But if you're whizzing through days and nights quite quickly, then 5 seconds to transition from dusk to full day, that makes more sense, right? So all I'm saying is it's not the times that they trigger that you need to adjust, because this code will always trigger them at the hours that you need them to trigger. It's just how long does it take for it to go from its current lighting preset, whether it's night or day, to full, in this case, dusk. Well, 10 seconds might be too quick for that. So these times you'll need to adjust when you adjust these numbers, because obviously you want the actual transitions to make more sense. Hopefully I'm making sense there. With that said, I'm sure there's probably ways you could maybe make a function for the actual lighting presets so that you can tie it into the clock and things. I didn't want to go into that level of complexity in this video. I just wanted to introduce it, in a very sort of slightly beginner, even if it is a bit intermediate, but, entry level, and then let you go off and experiment in your own time with, taking this and maybe improving it or whatever. But this should give you a rough idea of how to make a game clock that functions in RPG in a Box. Both it ticks and cycles round, but also you can tie events to particular hours and have those events trigger. So with that said, that'll wrap up this video. Thanks for watching.